Welcome back to MVP Real Estate Podcast, Season 4, Episode 8 with Ed Matthews out of Connecticut. Um, we have not had a storyline like him. He did come from a successful career within Silicon Valley selling. He was on the marketing sales side of a few different companies that he touches on during the show. But he did something super smart, and I wish more people took I'm going to call it a sacrifice, because you do have to sacrifice some of your income to set yourself up later. And he would take his profits, his bonuses, set them aside, and then built real estate up to where it surpassed his salary, to then now he can run that and be home more, because his job obviously made him travel around the world. So very unique story. So let's bring on Ed. All right, Ed, thanks for coming on the show, giving us some time. I appreciate it.
Truly my pleasure. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Well, I start the show the same way every time,
Yep.
giving the audience a little background of where you came from. I
Who am
always
I
say,
and
like, what is that?
who am I and why am I here?
Yes, who are you and why are you here?
All
Perfect way to
right.
put it.
All right. So I'm Ed Matthews. I'm the principal at Clark Street Capital. I also am the host of the Real Estate Underground podcast. I spent about 24, almost 25 years working for Silicon Valley companies, flying all over the world, slinging our country and sometimes all over the world, slinging software and services. And, on the side, I built a small to medium-sized portfolio of small multifamilies over the course of years. I started in 2011, and over the course of about 7 years, I built up a portfolio large enough to be able to surpass what I was making in corporate America. And that happened to coincide with a couple of life events. One was that I had teenage daughters who were, or preteen daughters who were about to become teenagers. And I wanted to be a significant influence in their lives. And it's really hard to do that from a Courtyard Marriott somewhere else in the world.
Yep.
And so that's part of it. And I also realized that I didn't want to travel as much as I was traveling, because I was missing too much good stuff at home, between, missing and not seeing my wife and not seeing my daughters, who I like them a lot and they still like me a lot. And I wanted to maintain that. So it all kind of coincided in late 2017. And so I resigned from my role at a company called DocuSign, and started in earnest February of 2018, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, that is quite a career there. I've got a lot of questions about Silicon Valley, because
Sure.
I'm not the tech guy, and what goes on in Silicon Valley right now it's blowing my mind with all the technology and stuff that's coming out of there.
It is amazing. I've been detached from it for a while, but I do keep up. I try to keep up. And I'm not a technical programmer. I was a marketing and operations guy myself, sales, marketing, and operations guy, but I'm just techie enough.
Yeah. And were you with DocuSign that whole 25 years?
No.
Okay.
I was with probably 5 or 6 different companies over that course of time.
Okay. Because DocuSign, that's a big name in the digital signature world.
It is. Yeah, was and is the leader, right? And
Yeah.
so I had the opportunity to work for Keith Kroc, who was the chairman and at that point CEO. And he's one of the pantheon of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. He's certainly on that list of people, the who's who's. And when I had the opportunity to go work for him, I jumped at it, and it was an amazing ride. I loved the job. The job wasn't the problem. It was the fact that I wasn't home was the issue. And I was standing. So Keith Kroc, I affectionately referred, when he goes into his we were at a year-end summation kind of conference of, hey, good job, we had a great year, and I refer to it as Keith's laser light show. I mean, he oozes charisma, right? And so he's up on stage and he's doing his his speech, and everybody was excited, and he was right. Where we were in the market was spot on, and where we were going was exactly where we needed to go. And I'm standing there like, yep, he's absolutely right, but I just can't do this anymore. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I actually resigned 4 months before they went public, which
Really?
everybody and their brother were like, "Are you out of your ever loving mind?" And I said, "Yes, I am, but I'm still doing it, and I'm out of here." So and it's been a great ride ever since. So
Yeah. I mean, it's a nervous step, but it sounds like you prepared yourself
terrifying.
pretty well.
Yeah, it was terrifying, but we muddled through and battled hard, and got the business operating to where it could run without me, which is good. And now we're in a pretty substantial transition period where we're selling off a lot of those smaller multifamilies, and we've launched a debt fund, and we're now aggressively looking for much larger buildings. So,
Okay.
typically my buildings were our smallest one was about 4 units, and our largest one was, I think, 15 units. And so we had a whole bunch of buildings, and I was herding a whole bunch of cats, keeping those buildings cooking.
Yep.
And I realized that if I could sell off those assets and consolidate them into, one or two much larger, 75, 100, 150 unit buildings, that operationally we could become a lot more efficient. So that's the process we're going through right now.
Awesome. And I want to get to that stuff, but I feel like for the listeners, we should try to go through the beginning and then talk about your transition, or I'll
Sure.
call it an exit, but it's not really an exit. It's more of a transition, like you're saying.
Yeah. A
So
metamorphosis. A
I would go
metamorphosis.
back to, all right, 25 years, you're working at Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
and you said you were buying multifamilies through that.
Started in 2011, right?
Okay. And those were some of your smaller ones that you still have today, those 4 to 15 units?
I have some of them. Most of them I've sold. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So, and this is a curiosity question. How many properties or how many doors did you have when you ended your career with, I'll call it Silicon Valley?
Let's see. I probably had about 95 doors when I left.
Okay.
We grew that to just short of 200, and that was across like 22, 23 different buildings. So it was a lot to
That's
manage.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's super, super cool to have your career going, and you set yourself up super well to when you did want to say, I'm done. I want to be at home. I want to be with the family, be with the kids. You had something to fall back on where your income didn't go from zero or from what you're making to zero.
Right.
So
Right.
very, very smart idea. That was good foresight. Did you know that's the progression you wanted to get to, or did it just like
It
strike you
just
one
kind of
day?
congealed. I didn't have a grand plan. I had always intended on working in technology until I was done, and whatever that meant. And the real estate thing was fun. So, and it was I realized that in order to, I made a pretty good income from Silicon Valley and those jobs, and that paid the bills and allowed us to go on nice vacations and save money and all that. But I also realized that just saving the 10, 12, 15%, or the bonuses that we were getting, or the commissions I was getting, wasn't going to be enough to build a retirement for me and my wife. And so that's where the real estate came in, is to start to build you know actual cash flow and wealth. And so that's why I started to build it. It just so happened that I reached a point where I didn't want to manage a career anymore.
Yeah.
I had run teams, I had run companies, I had dialed it back to just carry a bag and run as much smaller teams. And it just I couldn't find a place where I could get the life balance I was looking for, because I live here on the East Coast. I live in Connecticut. My clients and customers were, frankly, all over the world.
Uh-huh.
So if somebody at ABC company needs to see me, I get on a plane Sunday night or Monday morning and I go see them, right? And then I'm gone until Friday, and then I get back and try and reintroduce myself to my kids and my wife, and you
Yeah.
know, it becomes tedious. So
Yeah. It gets very, very difficult. So,
it
man, you
does.
stumbled on a very good not planned plan.
Yeah, I would love to say I had this strategic grand plan, but I really didn't.
No, that's all right. I mean, it
Kind of
worked.
happened.
So as you're in Silicon Valley, you're making your money, you're like, all right, did you find a multifamily you wanted, or did you get presented an option? Like, what was your first dip in your toe in real estate moment?
Oh, it's a funny story, actually. So in 2008, a very good friend of mine handed me Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The
It's
Purple
the
Bible.
first book I read when I got into real estate too.
Yep. And I had always been interested in real estate. As a teenager, I was working for home builders and, I'm a big guy. So, I was one of the guys that would pick up heavy things and put them someplace else, on site, and we'd clean up afterwards. And every once in a while they let me swing a hammer and all that. But, I fell in love with the whole idea. And I had always had this vision of, when I get to a point in my career, I was going to build houses. And then I put it to the side because, life happens and family and obligations and all that.
Yep.
Um, so my friend hands me Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I consumed it in like a day. I mean, it was just I was obsessed with the book, and I've probably read it a dozen times since then. I pretty much read it every year, and the whole idea of building wealth through real estate really resonated with me. And so I, thought, okay, well, I'm going to go do this. And '08, obviously Lehman Brothers declares bankruptcy, and the world, hangs on by the economic world hangs on in the balance for, that brief 18 to 24 month period of time. And it took me a long time to find the courage to actually pull the trigger on a deal. So in that time, we moved from Boston, where we were living, down to Connecticut, where my wife and I are both from. And I met this a broker, Amy Rio, who was a small startup broker. She probably had 4 or 5 agents at that point. Right now, she's probably one of, if not the biggest brokerages in the state of Connecticut.
Wow.
And so through her generosity, she probably showed me no less than 20 different buildings. And I always found an excuse not to buy it because I was terrified, right? Oh, I don't want to buy a white one. Oh, I don't want a blue building. Oh my God, that one needs a roof. Oh, that, okay, the 25 windows are good, but it has a stained glass window. How do you replace that? I don't want to deal with that. And I found all these, silly reasons not to buy. And we finally found a 4 family on Clark Street in East Hartford, Connecticut for $99,000. And we walked through it, and I'm already, going through the catalog in my head of, here are the 19 reasons why I'm not going to buy this building.
Yep.
And so I'm walking back out to the parking lot, and she said, well, what do you think? And I started with my usual, well, it needs this and it needs that. And she's nodding her head, and and she takes a pen out and she clicks it, and she takes a piece of paper and puts it on the hood of my car. Now I'm like 6'3", 6'4". I'm not a small human being, right? Amy Rio on her best day is like 5'1". She's tiny, right? And so I'm like, easily a foot plus taller than this person. And so she, very calmly puts the piece of paper on the hood of my car, and she goes, look, I've shown you 20 something buildings, and every single one of them was a good deal. And if you don't sign this contract, A, I'm going to buy this because it's a great deal. And B, I'm never talking to you again. She clicks the pen, hands it to me, and goes, now sign the effing
Whoa.
contract. Right. And she didn't say effing. And I was like, oh, yes, ma'am. Took the pen, shaking, signed the contract for 99K. And, 4 weeks or 6 weeks later, I owned the building. And it was probably one of the better investments I ever made. I bought it for 99,000. I put probably about 22,000 into it in terms of making it clean and safe, and upgrading, what needed to be upgraded, and bringing it up to basically a good standard. I did most of the work. I did a lot of the work myself on the weekends, and I actually just sold that building for $410,000 probably about 3 months ago. So
Wow.
wherever Amy Rio is, thank you. That was
Yeah.
in for us.
No, that's a very, very good story because the first purchase is always the scariest one.
Absolutely terrifying.
Yep. I remember there's always like moments in your life where you can remember the anxiety or the stress you were in.
Right.
And like one moment was my first college start. I was so nervous, like my calves were like vibrating from the
Right.
nerves. In the first auction where I bought a house and I was bidding, I had the
Right.
same like shaky. And
Yep.
it's the same thing with my first purchase. As we're at the closing, like I can feel everything shaking because of my
Yeah.
nerves. And
Yeah.
like I don't know what I'm gonna run into. You see the things like, oh, we need to replace the stained glass window, and how do we do that? And the flooring needs repaired, and what are we gonna
Right.
find underneath the walls? And
Right.
all of those things that I didn't really know I was gonna run into are running through my head of like, oh, this is a bad idea, this is a bad idea. But you just need that one person to give you the kick,
Right.
get into it, and then the waterfall kind of
Yep.
opens up.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people, and I mentor people now myself, and they say, well, how do you get past the fear? And I say, you do it anyway, right? My hand still shakes on every contract and every mortgage I sign, because, frankly, if it doesn't shake, you don't understand the magnitude of the responsibility you're taking on, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's a big deal, and it's a lot of responsibility. And of course you're nervous. You should be, but
Yeah,
hopefully you've thought it through and you've got a good plan, and you've reserved some capital for contingencies, because every building, especially the old ones that I buy, every single one of them has a curveball. And so, you just you weather that storm and you keep going, and eventually, time is our friend in real estate, right? So as long as you can continue to keep a building cash flow positive, and do a good job of managing the property. And what I mean by that is taking good care of the folks that live there.
hmm
Uh, it's in the long run, you're going to win.
yeah, it's true. Um, and you learn that early on, I guess, because a lot of people when they get their first one get so nervous and um, I guess they're caught up in learning about it rather than running it. So where
Yes.
you start getting like the quote unquote slumlords, where they don't take care of their building because they're like, oh, I have one and it's doing its thing, and then there's all this deferred maintenance
Right.
that falls in. So um, that's a super cool story, by the way.
Thank you.
So it takes 20 trips or 20 tours of homes to find one. After you bought that first one, obviously you have your time of rehab and getting
Yep.
that stabilized. How soon after that did you go on to number two?
Once I realized it wasn't that scary, I immediately started looking for more, but I was out of money. So what we were doing was we would flip a couple houses, and we would take the capital from those and buy another multi, flip a couple more houses, buy a multi. And I kind of rinsed and repeated that process for a better part of 7 years.
Yeah. And at that point, you're still working in Silicon Valley,
Oh
you're
yeah,
still traveling. So that means you need to find boots on the ground. How
I
did you
did.
go about that process to find your support team?
So some of it were people that I knew from, because I'm from Connecticut. So there were people I went to high school with who were now general contractors and plumbers and electricians who I trusted. And so a lot of the guys that I worked with were people I'd known for, 10, 12, 15 years. Um, in other cases, I would use referrals, and give that contractor a little tiny project to do and see if they performed. And if they performed, then we gave them a much bigger project.
Yep.
And it was a lot of trial and error, um, and a whole lot of pounding the phones trying to find the right people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And from my perspective, one of the things that that we were very specific about was, the scope of work, right? So we were giving them really solid scopes of work so they understood exactly what needed to be done. There was no guesswork. If something, if that curveball that I mentioned earlier did pop up, it was a one-off, and we would, wherever I was in the world, we'd get on a phone and talk about it and make a decision and keep going. And but beyond that, they knew exactly what the project was, so they didn't really need me to manage it. And I had a level of trust in those folks, so that I knew that they were doing the right thing. And by the time I got back into town Thursday, Friday, I was on site just to kind of walk around and make sure that everything was going the way we had agreed. So
Yeah, that's good. It's good that you had connections, because that's always a hard part.
helps. It
There's some
helps.
people that invest in. I'm assuming you've gone out of Connecticut now, kind of like some
We're
long
starting
distance.
to. Yeah, we're
Okay.
starting to. So I had a portfolio up in Vermont with a friend of mine, and we've since sold that. Um, and now the capital that we're raising from sales of the Connecticut properties, we're heading to North Carolina to buy much larger properties.
Gotcha. And now you start that cycle again of trying to find your boots on the ground in that
Yep.
area,
Yep.
which have you started that process trying to find general contractors and property managers and
Just starting that process. Uh,
okay.
right now, I'm focused on selling the last 5 buildings that we're going to be selling up here.
Okay.
So it's kind of consuming my days right now. But
Yeah.
other than that, we're just getting cranked up. It's interesting. I've got a whole lot of things happening at the same time, in that we're raising we just started this debt fund. We are selling off these last 5 properties. My youngest daughter plays softball, and she does travel softball. So my wife and I are switching off, who gets to take Maggie to wherever. My wife and daughter right now are in Kansas City, and
Really?
I'm scooping her up, and we're going to Jersey for 2 weeks, and then they're going to Colorado, and then I'm taking her to California. And so that's part of this too. So
That's all for softball?
yeah, yeah.
Wow. So we're gonna be watching her on ESPN someday. If she's
Uh,
traveling around the country you said she was 12?
no, she's 16.
16. Still. That's that is awesome. So
Yeah,
good
so
for her.
maybe
If I ever see Matthews on the back, I'll
you'll
know.
know. Blonde ponytail. Yep, that's her.
Perfect.
Yep.
We
Um,
had a recent guest that is in North Carolina, investing in the North Carolina area. We have to go back and look to see if we can connect you two to talk, and maybe they can help you with some contractors and stuff in the area.
I would
yeah.
love that. Thank you.
Yeah, he was just on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'll get you that information.
Many
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we can avoid and I didn't mute myself, did I?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Nope, you're good.
So, I wanted to go back to the curveball because these are always the fun questions. So you bought your first one, you bought a couple more in Connecticut.
Yep.
Do you have a story, an appropriate story of a curveball that was thrown where I always see like when people first get into real estate and a curveball gets thrown, they're like, see, this is why I didn't want to do it. They throw their arms up and they sell off the
Right.
property and like it wasn't for me.
Right.
So what are one of the moments, because every real estate investor has a curveball, if not hundreds of them.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
was
it's
a big one for you that you got through that turned out to be all right?
so like you and I just were talking about earlier, invariably there is always something that you find that you're like, oh, that's not really the right way to do it. So our first pass on a building is clean and safe. So we go through all the mechanicals, the electrical, the plumbing, and make sure that they are um up to standard, and that if there's any issues, that we resolve them immediately. Almost always there's something's wired wrong, something's plumbed wrong. The mechanicals, the HVAC system hasn't been serviced in a while, and when we do service it, we realize, oh, there's a crack in the boiler and we've got to fix that. So there's that part of it. But there's also things like, I mean, I think our biggest hiccup, I nearly collapsed a 10,000 square foot building. Well, I didn't, but a
Oh
contractor had.
no.
Yeah. And so I'll tell you that story. So we bought a 5 family in New Britain on Arch Street, and like a week later, the property manager that I had hired called at like 6 a.m. and there is never good news at 6 a.m. when your PM calls.
No,
And
no.
so we she said, turn on the news. There's a fire next door to your building. Your building's fine. I'm on site. And it doesn't appear to be spreading. So, but I just wanted to let you know that it's the building next door. And so I get on, and it's this 4-story, 12,000 square foot, chimney that's just on totally ablaze. So week or two later, we go and look at the other property, thinking, all right, well, maybe we'll buy the lot and build something there. And we get into I'm a little bit adventurous, so we kind of walked into the building, which I don't recommend.
Oh no.
And we kind of walked through it and realized that the fire had been centralized to 2 very specific areas, and that the rest of the building was actually in pretty good shape. So I called a structural engineer friend of mine, and we walked it even more, and he realized this building can be saved. It's actually not a tear down. And so I ended up, through a friend, tracking down the property owner, and worked out a deal. And we basically bought the property for a song. I think we paid $50,000
Wow.
for it. And the first step in a property like that is you've got to secure it. So we board it up and make sure that no one else can get into it, and then we work to make it as weather tight as possible. So hired the contractor I hired a sub. So I had vetted the primary contractor. I did not vet the sub, which was my mistake. And the sub, so brick buildings are basically tensioned. The way that they're supported is through tension, right? So there's cross beams that keep tension on the walls so that they don't fall in on one another.
Yep.
And so the subcontractor was charged with taking the decking off the roof and the rafters off the roof, but not the support, so that we could rebuild the rafters and decking, and then put a roof on it so that it wouldn't rain inside and create mold and a whole bunch of other problems.
Right.
And what those guys did was they cleared the 4th floor of all wood, all support, everything.
Dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. And so I'm in New York. I got a phone call and from my GC saying, "Hey, we've got a problem." Okay, tell me what it is. They cleared, my sub cleared the support of the property, or the 4th floor, and the back wall, which was 50 feet, 3 courses of brick, 18 feet tall, fell into the back parking lot. First question is, anybody hurt? And
Yeah.
no. So good. Is anybody in the building? No, everybody's out. Okay, stay out. And I'll be there as soon as possible. I was 4 hours away. And by the time I got there, the front, which was also 50 feet, 3 courses of brick, 22 feet tall, fell into the building and cracked all of the floor joists in the 3rd and 4th floor. And that was a bad day. But
that does not sound like a great day at all.
No. But the good news is everyone was fine. No one got hurt, and we were able to, through insurance and a couple of lawsuits, we were able to get it back on track, and I've since sold that to another developer. So, but that was probably my biggest curveball.
So what did I miss? What was the worst part?
So the worst part was that, well, the best part was that no one got hurt.
Yeah.
But the fact is that building was no longer viable, and so we ended up having to tear it down.
Yeah.
And then I ended up selling it to another developer who's I haven't been up there lately, but I imagine he's doing a good job with it. So hopefully it's a beautiful. He's already built a new building there. Hopefully.
Okay, so that was one where it went so far backwards that it didn't really apply or fit to what you guys wanted to do. So you sold
Correct.
off the lot.
Correct. We
And,
tore the building down and then cleared the lot and then sold the lot.
and there are so many questions I have about that part right there
Sure.
that I don't know what you can and can't get into, but
I can tell you anything.
um so you mentioned before about how you vetted the GC but not the subcontract, and the
Right.
subcontract is the one that actually ended up pretty much demoing your building.
Correct. Yeah. And I have yet to make that mistake again.
Yes. And obviously, for people that are getting into this and going to be doing flips, make sure you understand who is, I guess, liable for the subcontractors on your site. Is it the
Right.
GC or is it the owner of the property? So,
The GC in that case, but
yeah.
also, make sure that you understand every single human being and their background, who's walking your property. Right.
Yep. Yeah. And we work with an investor here in Milwaukee, and one of his buddies or his family member works for Master Lock. And
Yeah.
Master Lock now has lockbox codes that you can put about 10 different codes in.
Mhm.
So you understand you can give one to each subcontractor or agent that's walking through, and
Right.
you know what numbers punched in to know who's on site.
Right.
So there's so much technology these days to know what's going on in your building that if you don't know, it's just because either one, you're new and you didn't know to know it, or
Right.
you're careless
Right.
with it.
Pretty
So,
much.
man, so all right, what did that do to your numbers? Because obviously, as you buy the property, you didn't think, well, if this falls down and we sell it. So, did that ruin your numbers on that purchase, or
Oh
did you
yeah.
feel
Yeah. I
okay?
had to actually pump in about $350,000 of my own money to
Ugh,
make sure that that the investors didn't lose their shirts. And then uh, insurance kicked in, and I sued a whole bunch of people,
yeah,
and ultimately got that money back, and then sold the property for a profit. So the challenge, the biggest challenge was that happened in November of 2019. So as we're going through this process, COVID
I
happens,
knew it.
yeah,
right?
Not gonna go there.
yeah,
So, here in Connecticut, we lost, I want to say 18, 20 months worth of docket time in the court system. So we couldn't do anything for, the better part of almost 2 years. And so that's why I was pumping money into this, is
yeah,
because I was working with the city to make sure that it was safe, because
yeah,
I didn't want it falling into the street. The building itself, fortunately, they built those buildings back then really, really rigid. So the rest of the building was actually stable. But it was a challenging time, to say the least.
yeah,
And ultimately, when COVID released and we were able to kind of get back in front of a judge, we were able to navigate that fairly quickly, and so that worked out. It worked out for me and my company,
yeah.
um, and ultimately for our investors. So that bullet dodged, but it could have been a nightmare.
Yeah. And to make it worse, right during the period of time where you couldn't get in to get answers. So you have
Right,
holding costs for that whole time. You've got security looming over your head that whole time.
right.
Oh man.
I wouldn't say that's a
And
curveball. I would say that's the high and tight brush back. Maybe hit you in the
that's one right in
helmet.
the ear.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, and you
Gosh.
stuck with it. So even through
Nice.
that process, you got through it. You still came out positive. Had to
Yes,
be
we
two
did.
years later, but you came out on
Almost
top.
three. Yep.
Almost three.
Yep.
Dang.
Yeah.
And you still had the bug to buy more real estate, which is awesome.
Which is crazy, but yes, I did. Well, it was an anomaly, right? It was something that
Yes.
somebody made a really bad decision, that resulted in a really bad outcome, but it didn't affect, the overall my trust in the business. It just, it taught me a very valuable lesson in terms of how I needed to run construction projects, even beyond what I was already doing. I thought I was doing the right thing, right? I thought, having contracts and hold harmless and insurance and requiring the same of all the folks that were, people I was hiring was appropriate. What didn't occur to me until that whole thing blew up was I needed to do the next layer of that as well, which was if you're bringing in a sub, they need to adhere to the exact same rigors. And the GC, I don't know that the GC did anything wrong. But the fact is that that sub, he did not supervise his guys and they made a really bad decision.
Yeah. A scary decision. That's
Yeah.
not like a little oopsie.
No. Well,
No.
fortunately, no one was hurt. And all is well now. But yeah, it was pretty stressful there for a while.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that story, because
Sure.
I don't have one that comes even close to buildings falling over. And so that's interesting. But I want to kind of get into the phase of where you start selling off properties and turning your portfolio to do something else than what it's been doing. Because it's hard for investors who they're like, we've got these properties, they're operating correctly, they're great. Like, why change it? Why do something else? So was there a moment for you that was like, this is why we're trying to pivot, or this is why we're trying to sell and get into this asset class?
Yeah, because the goal is to get to 1,000 units.
Okay.
And if I'm going to do that, it's easier to do it in chunks of 100 to 150 units than it is to do it at 6, 8, 10 units at a time.
Yep.
And so, in order for me to be able to go after those much larger units, I need the capital, I need the equity from those smaller buildings to be able to go do that. And so, that's why we started to unwind a lot of these smaller properties. For me, it was we brought our management in-house right after COVID. So it's probably been a couple, 3 years now. And turns out property management's hard. And
Yes.
Been hearing that.
right. And so I now know why they made me pay what they made me pay, because it's hard. And so, a lot of it was just making sure that everything was running properly. And, at that point, we had, I don't know, 23, 24, 25 properties. And so me and my team were pulled in so many different directions that there were days where we just couldn't keep up. And so my thinking was, if we pare that down and consolidate those properties into, one or two much larger properties, then we can form teams on those buildings and it becomes a much more efficient management process. And so that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. No, that's smart. And I was told that, like, early on, listening to Bigger Pockets podcast, as I'm like working with Dan at a different company, as we're driving in outside sales, I am like eating up real estate podcasts.
Right.
And one of the things that they said was, if you're nervous about managing a multifamily, the best way I can put it is the advantages to multifamily, and the bigger you get, the easier it is.
Right.
Because you could have a single family home, and if you lose your tenant, you are 100% vacant.
Correct.
In a fourplex, if you lose a tenant, you're 25% vacant. And
right.
two, if you need to manage the building, you go to one spot and you manage 4 places. Whereas if you go to a single family, all you do is one tenant, and now you've got 10 doors in 10 different areas, or you
Right.
could have 10 doors in one building.
Exactly.
So it was kind of their push to say, like, get into multifamily, because it's going to be, at the end of the day, easier for you to manage than just getting a single family. And there's more security because you've got more streams coming in rather than just one.
Exactly. And they're easier to manage, they're easier to buy, they're easier to finance. Yeah, I mean, it's all of those.
Yeah. So very good idea. And I understand the concept of selling off those smallers to get into bigger door counts per building, which is good. And I'm assuming that, seeing as you bought your first one or your first few early on, you're kind of running towards the end of your depreciation schedule on the properties. So
to a certain extent, but I mean, we're paying, I mean, the challenge in this market is there aren't a lot of opportunities to exchange. So
That was my next question, was the
yeah, so
1031.
we're biting the bullet and paying the taxes.
Yeah. So you couldn't find a property that you could actually 1031 in?
Not yet.
Yeah. Because timing is huge with the 1031. If anybody out there listening has experience or knowledge on them, but there's very strategic and mandatory timelines on an exchange. And right now in this market, it's going to be very tough to do it.
Right.
But if you can find one, it's great because, like you said, you can avoid paying your capital gains tax on it.
Yep.
I just
But if
heard,
you can't,
I just read something on that. Is there 1031 syndication? Have you heard anything about that? I've heard that there's people that are combining their 1031 exchanges together to buy a larger, like obviously more expensive property when they're bundling with another person that's in a similar situation as yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure they're out there. The challenge with the 1031s these days is that I see a lot of people are overpaying for the buildings, and I'm just not going to do that.
Right.
They're pay the taxes, and okay, fine. It is what it is. But so we're taking a step backwards to take two steps forward, and not perfect, but it's, I would rather do that than get into a situation where I'm over leveraged.
yeah.
And they're trying to hold you, or take
is.
advantage of that, right? If they know you're in a 1031 exchange, they can hire or increase the asking price, like you're saying.
Right.
And
Yeah.
at that point, it financially doesn't make sense. Hey, eat the tax or the capital gains on it, and
That's it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a threshold, like running the numbers, if it's for pay or just pay taxes. I wonder if there is like that fine line that they have calced out, and that's why they're doing it.
I'm sure there
I would
is.
assume,
Yeah. I haven't
Yeah,
really
and there are
thought.
other ways. There are other ways, Delaware statutory trusts and to get
Yeah.
off the clock and things like that, that I've looked into, but I've yet to find something that's a good fit. So
Yeah.
come April, I'll be writing a check.
What is
we
that?
got a 12 unit opportunity here that's expired that we're talking about, but we just
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
haven't made contact with the seller yet. But that was one that we were looking at. But they want a pretty penny. Was it like 2.2 million, I think, for the 12
Ooh.
units?
Oh my goodness.
It's
Yeah.
three separate 4-unit buildings, but they're all right next to each other.
Yeah.
And they all cash flow really well right now. But obviously with that type of mortgage or
Yeah, that's a big number.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yep. And it's tough because we
That's why it
haven't
didn't sell.
ventured into purchasing multifamily yet.
Yeah.
So all of our rentals are usually single families. We've done flips. So we have yet to break into purchasing multifamily. We're currently building them, but
Okay.
haven't purchased. So that's a blue ocean that we have not swam in yet.
Yeah. So we're looking at development as well. We just bought it was actually a flip. Interesting story. So right around COVID again, we got it. So we used to flip, I don't know, anywhere from a dozen to a couple of dozen houses a year. And we would send out postcards. I'm a big believer in direct mail. And so a lot of these, we would send out a batch, and 6 months later, somebody would raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm ready," right? Because we're not cold calling, we're not doing any of that. We're just simply sending out, "We're here, we're looking to buy in your neighborhood," and then we use social media so that people can check us out, in terms of that we're legit and we can, if we say we can close, we'll close, and that we'll give them a fair price and treat them right and all that. And so we had sent out our last batch, I don't know, probably early fall of 2019. I get a phone call February of 20 saying, "Hey, I've got I think his grandparents had passed, a grandmother had passed, and that they were looking to sell the property. And it happened to be, a couple of miles from my office. So I said, tell you what, let me go drive by it. I'll take a look at it and I'll call you back." And so it was a 1,500 square foot ranch, a perfect flip property. And I went back to him and said, "Done. What do you want for it?" And, a brand new, like, beautiful ranch like that probably go for, I don't know, 450 in this market. And he's like, "Yeah, I want 350 for it." I'm like, "That's a little tight." He goes, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll throw in the land behind it as well. And I hadn't even looked at a plot. I hadn't even looked at it. I just looked at the property. And I said, well, how much is the land? He said, 58 acres. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what do you want for that? He said, nothing. I just don't want to pay taxes on it,
Oh,
but I'll throw that in.
What?
And I said, okay, so 350 and it's the 58 acres and the house. You got a deal. And
Wow.
so,
oh my gosh.
here's the thing. So COVID strikes like a month later. Turns out he's not the only executor, or he's the executor, but not the only heir. There's 13 other heirs, and they don't like each other. So getting them on the same page is going to be a challenge. They hire a probate attorney to try and bring together that group in some way, shape, or form to figure out how to divvy up the money.
Yeah.
And they can't go through probate because the courts are shut, right?
Yeah.
So 2 years later, they're still going back and forth trying to figure out, okay, who gets what. They finally, in I think like right around Thanksgiving of last year, so right around probably November 2023, I get a phone call. Okay, we're ready to go. And I said, and I had left an open offer. I said, I'll stand by this offer for, in perpetuity. You just tell me when you're ready.
Yeah. I
And
mean, that's a pretty sweet offer. I would have that outstanding too.
yeah, no problem, right?
Yeah.
Open-ended.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, we're ready. And I said, well, the money I had set aside for that property, I've spent and recouped and spent and recouped probably 3 or 4 different times. So I'm going to need 90 days to close, which they said, no problem. And so we ended up buying it in March of this past year. So yeah, crazy.
That is awesome.
So they
Congrats
didn't
on
even
that
ask,
deal.
they didn't ask for market price. They just accepted what it was.
Yeah, we ended up helping them out paying the this year's taxes.
I was gonna say they probably had back taxes that they weren't paying.
Yeah,
They just
so we
wanted
paid
their
that.
whatever type of proceeds they could get. That's
Yep.
crazy.
Yeah, and so we ended up buying the property, and there's a tenant in there right now, and he's moving out in a few weeks. And as soon as he moves out, we're going to work. But right now, we're doing all the survey work and feasibility studies for the land to figure out what we can put there. And the intent is to put a whole bunch of multifamily back there at some point.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's you hear stories like that and you're like, wow, they stumbled on a good one. But I don't really think it's stumbling. Like you put in all the hard work and the development before
Right.
to get
Right.
yourselves in the position where you can get presented those.
Yeah, that
So-
family probably received a dozen postcards from us over the years, right?
Yeah.
So, and yeah, so it's what's that old axiom? Luck favors the prepared mind, right?
Yep.
Oh, it's just it's a matter of building a brand and then ultimately building trust. And at some point in their minds, we earned the right to do business together, and they called us.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Primacy
stick
and
with it
recency
long
too,
enough
right?
and
You were probably one of the first people to send them a postcard, and probably one of the most recent to send them a postcard too. So they're gonna be like, all right, we got that
Yep.
set in the back of our mind, even if it's subconsciously. They're gonna
Right.
where's that postcard? We'll call this guy, and yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be
No,
fun.
the gentleman told me it was literally, there was a magnet on his fridge with our postcard.
that's
So,
cool.
yeah.
Front and center.
Good luck with
That's
that
where
one.
you wanna be.
We're in the process. We went through the survey, working with the city. We're taking Marcus. That was the first sheriff sale that you bought?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a double lot. Trying to parcel off the other side. Now they're going to build a duplex on
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, okay, so that lot was a mailer. It was kind of similar to yours. I sent out, this was early on, and this is when I'm still outside sales, and I would take different directions to every place I had to go, and then I would take pictures on Deal Machine
Driving
that
for
would skip
dollars.
trace and then send out a mailer to the owner, not the property,
Right.
but where the owner lived. And he called me up, and I honestly wasn't prepared because this is like 3-4 months in. I get a phone call like, hey, I got one of your mailers. Like I'm willing to sell the property. And I'm like, okay, I run a quick little comp thing and I meet him at the property and he talks about how his mom lived there or his mother-in-law. And then they used it as their lake house and they're just
Yep.
kind of done with it. They don't use it.
Yep.
I was like, all right, what do you want to sell it for? And he's like, 100,000. I bought it for 97, so I'll sell it for 100. And I was
Done.
like, I'm not gonna barter with this one. That's
No.
fine. 100.
Just say thank you and sign the paperwork.
Yep, that sounds good. And then
Yep.
I didn't know because he kind of hesitated. Like he thought there was going to be some bartering back and forth where I just kind of agreed to it. But yeah, it was on a double lot and it already, you had to put 20 to 30,000 into the house. And now that's paid for. So now we're sitting on 2 lots in a nice area where we can put up 2 duplexes and pull the same amount of rent. So
Perfect.
yeah, it was a sweet deal, but I stumbled on mine because I was only 4 months in. You're putting in a whole marketing system to get there. So
You know, I think I don't believe in luck, right? I mean, I think that it's just a matter of being consistent,
yeah,
identifying, being very clear about the properties that kind of fit your buy box, right? And then identifying those in the marketplace. Like, I mean, so I'm a data driven kind of guy, right? So I know that there are, at one point there were 1,208 properties in the state of Connecticut that I had targeted to own. And so we would reach out to them on a monthly or quarterly basis, just to see if they would entertain an offer. And every once in a while, somebody would say yes, and we'd make an offer. And every once in a while, some of those offers came to fruition, right?
mhm,
It's that simple. I mean, it's not a matter of, there's no science to it. It's just being consistent.
yeah,
Who's
yeah. And
who's
I'm
that
sure that's
salesman
what
that
you
always says
preach to
always
your,
follow up? Make sure to follow up too.
Yeah, the fortune's in the follow-up, right? I
Hmm.
mean,
yeah,
that's where you make it, because you've got to touch, being a marketing guy here, I mean, you've got to touch a human being no less than 7 times before they connect. I have a problem with, you have a solution that could solve my problem, to, okay, you have enough credibility that I'm willing to listen. Okay, now I'm going to listen, and now I trust you. And then ultimately, okay, I trust you enough that I'm willing to do business with you, right? It's a
yeah,
process
yep,
that the human brain needs to go through. And so, you've got to be consistent and constantly touch those folks so that they know that you're for real.
yeah. And I'm sure that's what you're preaching to your. You said you're educating new investors as well. You've
You,
got like
yeah.
an educational program, and then you mentioned that you
We're
have your.
launching a program. No, right now I'm just informally mentoring people. I always tell people I'm a cheap cup of coffee, right? So, or a cheap date. You buy me a cup of coffee, and I'll sit with you and answer any questions you have. And if you want to talk about a specific topic, I'll gladly tell you everything I know.
Yeah,
So, because it's a big world out there. If you find a deal that might profile what I'm looking for, fine. I'm happy for you, because I'm doing other things that are garnering me deals as well. So, it's rising tide floats all boats.
yep. That was a theme of our last company.
Really?
Yeah.
The rising tide rise, or what is it? Rising tide
Right.
raises all ships
Yep.
is what they kept saying.
Yep.
So, and it's true. I mean,
It
it
is
does make sense.
big world out there. It's
Yeah,
you can slice a pizza up a whole bunch of different ways, and everybody gets to eat.
yeah. And it's amazing how friendly and how many people within real estate understand that, because we've talked to countless people on podcasts. We've done deals as me as an agent. We've done deals with me as a buy and hold or a flipper. And I think very few have I actually crossed with the same agent or the same seller, same buyer. And that's just proof that, like, even in my little area or our little area of Wisconsin, it's very hard to cross streams and step on toes and get in the way of things because it's vast.
Sure.
So,
I mean, even Connecticut, a small state as this one, I mean, there are so many deals flying around that, and you can only do so many, right? So pick the one that is the best, that profiles you, and then if I have a deal that I know that profiles, that is interesting to one of my colleagues, I'll gladly pass it along. That's fine.
yeah, yeah. That's a good mentality to have. It keeps the industry going in a positive way.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure you'd mentioned that you have a podcast as well. So as well as your cheap cup of coffee, if
Yep.
you want to listen to more information, the Real Estate Underground is your podcast.
That's right.
When does that air? Or what day does that come out?
Tuesdays, and it's on any channel, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever.
Awesome. Is there like specific topics you get into, or is it kind of a general today we
So
want to talk about this aspect.
yeah, so a lot of it's multifamily since that's what I do, but we have rehabbers, we've had folks that invest in RV parks and mobile homes and self-storage and realtors and how to and talk about how to work with investors. The whole idea here is to make it educational and kind of give back. I mean, I've been very fortunate to have a whole bunch of mentors who gave me, threw an arm around me either because they saw something in me or they felt sorry for me or somewhere in between. And one of the ways that I return that, because they didn't want anything from me, is the only way the way I return that is through the podcast. And so we try to drop as many gold nuggets along the way as possible.
Yeah, that's good. And that's what the whole premise of this was to educate. I wanted
Absolutely.
people to get into it and find that just like you, the first deal may be scary. It probably will be scary,
It will be guaranteed.
but it'll pass and
Yep.
it won't be as scary. And you'll actually make, like you did, a nice little retirement where you can basically retire from your full-time job. I mean, you
Yep.
didn't retire to like eat
Well, I didn't retire.
bonbons on
I
the
still
beach,
work,
but
yeah,
yeah, you just have a different career now.
right.
So that's a very, very cool and interesting story. A lot of hard work put in on your side. So kudos to that.
Thank you.
And man, a wealth of knowledge that I'm
Thanks.
sure
Yeah.
that you shared with us and that you share on your own podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Obviously they can jump on, see you on the podcast, but is there a
Yep.
better way for people who, one, it's a niche area, multifamily, for those people that want to get into multifamily, to buy you either, if they're in the Connecticut area, a cup of coffee or a digital cup of coffee? How would they get a hold of you?
Just get on a Zoom and I'll have a conversation with you that way. Yeah. So typically the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, which is clarkst.com. And or you can hit me up on pretty much any social media. I'm Ed Matthews 4 on everything except TikTok. I promised my kids I wouldn't get on TikTok. They don't want to
Hold
see me.
strong, Ed. Hold strong.
They don't want to see me lip syncing or dancing, so that's fine. I don't want to do that either. And then Clark Street Capital on all social media channels as well.
Awesome. Oh, and I forgot to ask you about Clark Street Capital.
Sure.
Do you have a couple more minutes or do you got to get off? Because I know we're at
Oh,
our
I'm
hour.
good. I have time.
So Clark Street Capital, where does that fit into your process in terms of purchasing real estate? Is that something that you just added on? Because
No, so that is the company that acquires the multifamilies.
gotcha. Okay.
It's also the company that now has launched this debt fund.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
basically, so we're raising money to it's like think about it like the gold rush in the 1840s, right? The first millionaire in that 1849 gold rush was John Sutter, and John Sutter wasn't a gold digger. He was the guy that sold the shovels and the sieves to the gold diggers, right? And so the debt fund is designed to be the shovels and sieves, so that we're taking in money from money partners and then loaning it out at a bit of a higher rate, hard money rates. And so the investors, our money partners, get we don't charge any fees. So the investors get an 8% return on their money every quarter. And we get, we live on the arbitrage. So we're loaning that money out at 12% with 3 points up front. And so we're using the 3 points to, pay for the fund operation and create reserves. And we're living on the arbitrage between the 12 and the 4. Or 12
Awesome.
and 8%. Yeah.
Yeah. So not only can you help with knowledge, you can also help with lending for people.
Indeed. And in fact, we have about 75 or 80 flippers and small multifamily folks who are taking down properties. And so my role in that fund is to vet the investors, the actual construction projects, and make sure that they've thought through everything, and so they get that added value as well. And then ultimately, and my partner Mike Meyer is the person who does all the financial underwriting and servicing of the loans.
Okay. And I heard you can do small to medium investors. So for all those small to medium investors who feel like they're stuck and don't have capital, We've got Ed here. So as long as your deal makes sense and you pass the background check,
Right.
keep going.
We can help you.
Just
Well,
to
we'll have to
squash
keep you
that
in what Marcus
objection
calls
for
our
people.
Rolodex. We'll have to keep your name available too. He likes
Hey,
to use those
Rolodex
old terms.
is still
Please do.
relevant.
Please
It's still
do.
relevant.
Yeah, it's just electronic now.
Yes. But everybody knows what a Rolodex is.
At least
You
the
know
old,
what's funny?
at least us old guys like me do.
Right.
I remember sitting at my counter trying to call my friends, and I had to flip through to find his number and then get to
Yep.
my landline phone. So
Yep.
it's still relevant. It might be out in like the next 5-10 years where all the young kids take over.
Sitting right next to your rotary phone, probably.
Right.
Yeah, I still
I
got
think
the spin dial one.
I think if I handed my daughter a rotary phone, she wouldn't know what the heck to do with it.
You should ask her to look up those videos on TikTok. That you'll
Really?
see some funny ones.
I was just gonna make that point. On TikTok, they have two generations, like a mom and a daughter, or a dad and a son, or whatever combo. And they're like, okay, how do you pick up a phone? And like the kids with their flat hand put it up to their ear, where
Right.
like the older generation do the phone. And they're like, how do you hang it up? And you do that.
Right.
They just
Right.
like look at their hand and like touch it.
Right.
So there's these generational nuances that escape my mind because I don't think about
Crazy.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
all right,
Awesome.
cool. We're gonna put all your contact information in the show notes.
Thank you.
So that any investor listening or someone who's curious about multifamily, including myself, can reach out to you.
Please do.
And then if anybody's listening, tune into that podcast as well, because just within our hour and 20 minutes, that was super cool stories that you shared. I know you got a bunch of knowledge left in that podcast. I'm gonna have to catch up. How many seasons are on there?
Oh goodness, I think we're probably at about a 3 seasons. I want to say 120 or so episodes.
Oh,
So
all right. So I got a
yeah.
lot to listen to.
Yep.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Enjoy the
pleasure.
weather, and we'll catch up with you soon, because
Like that.
once you sell those last 5 properties, I want to see how North Carolina's going.
Okay, will do. Thanks, Marcus.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Have a
Dan.
good weekend.
See you later.
All right, you too. Bye, guys.
Bye.